Hey everyone, my name is Udam Dewaraja. I met or worked with many of you, and it's great to get a chance to talk about FOCUS. FOCUS stands for FinOps Open Cost and Usage Specification. It's something that we're leading through the FinOps Foundation. It's a technical project under the Linux Foundation. Just a quick background on myself. I've played in basically every role in this space since working at AWS in the early AWS days, then worked at a cost management vendor that's pretty prominent in this space. Then worked at Citi on the practitioner side, leading FinOps there, and now I'm working with the community on the FinOps Foundation side, building this specification. So I'm super excited about FOCUS because I think it's really a necessary thing that I think we've all slowly started to come to the realization over the past couple of years. So yeah, excited to be making some progress on this. We'll do a quick intro on FinOps Foundation and the framework. I think you guys heard a bunch of this in other talks already, so I'm going to just fly through those. Talk a little bit about some of the complexities we deal with cloud and the consumption-based model. Talk about why the data, the billing data is important, and then talk really more about the FOCUS common language and kind of what's in front of us in terms of the upcoming releases and then beyond. So the Foundation's core mission is to advance the people and the practice of FinOps. And we do that through community, education, as well as best practices and standards. A lot of times, I think in the last few years, you've probably heard about FinOps, and here's some of the data behind it. Lots of people kind of got into the cloud thinking, oh, we're going to save a ton of money, and this is going to be the greatest thing. And then they realize, actually, you got to be pretty disciplined to use cloud efficiently. And lots of people that started early and went headfirst into it ended up actually having to contract their cloud estate because it was just costing way too much money and there was no controls. So for those reasons, the FinOps Foundation established an open source framework where you essentially introduce a much more iterative approach to handling FinOps and the efficiency of your cloud consumption. It really heavily centers around collaboration and making real-time data-driven decisions based on near real-time data. So a lot of times also people think FinOps, they think it's cutting costs and saving money, and we like to say, I said this earlier too, is it's about making money. FinOps is about making money by investing in the right things and finding the efficiencies that drive your business. So a lot of people would kind of recognize the optimize phase. We like to say that the inform phase is really where you start. If you can't get the visibility into your spend and understand it, you can't optimize something that you can't really see and understand. So optimization is certainly a part of it as well. There's various levers in cloud. There's rate optimization. The Chase folks just talked about savings plans and reservations and optimizing your workloads that way. There's also usage optimization, and there's kind of things like spot instances and whatnot that are dynamically priced as well. And then it really consolidates with the need to continuously improve based on tracking metrics. And then, this cycle just goes on. There's no like, we did a sprint for FinOps and all of a sudden we're like efficient. Like this is a continuous thing. Your cloud consumption changes very dynamically. So hopefully I haven't scared you, but FinOps is a challenging thing. That's why we, from the framework and foundation perspective, we recommend that there is a central team that is understanding this picture really well and are pushing down the best practices to the rest of the organization. But it is also very important that the folks that are at those edges of the organization feel empowered to take the right actions. That accountability has to be over there with the people that are making the choices day to day about, whether their workloads should be using which type of instance, or should they switch to spot instances or whatnot. So where really we got into the focus discussion is FinOps is hard, but then you add all of this added complexity of every provider has their own schema and taxonomy and proprietary concepts, billing concepts, et cetera. That became an additional burden on this FinOps practitioners trying to essentially, get this out to the edges of their organization and trying to get people to be very efficient and understanding their costs and making the right decisions. So that's really where the idea for focus came along is we said, okay, let's at least try to normalize that part of it so that the FinOps capabilities can be built on top. So that's really this, what this picture represents is that there's this common taxonomy and schema and common semantics that we're essentially hoping to enforce through the specification. So here's kind of what we think the future looks like is FinOps framework. If you look at our website or read the book on FinOps, you'd recognize all of these. These are what we call capabilities. These are what the FinOps practitioners are doing. And core to all of this is that cost and usage data. So by tackling the data, we've essentially built a way for these capabilities to be done in a much more standard way across the provider, regardless of who's producing that data. So here's just a very kind of quick example of that's just on one provider figuring out what is considered effective cost. And effective cost is important because you have all these upfront payments that you might make for purchasing reservations and other things. But when you're doing your budgeting, you have to consider the amortization of that upfront payments along with the rest of your spend. So, thank God, in the future we won't have to be understanding, each provider's cost data at this level. Now you have, with Focus, a very simplified language and semantics that allow you to go get something like effective cost, which you then use for your FinOps practices. So Focus, as you might imagine, has gotten a ton of interest. I think we recently, just yesterday, crossed 100 members. Every kind of major cloud provider and FinOps vendor in this space has joined in. A bunch of the practitioner organizations have joined in as well. Essentially, everyone knows the pain, so they view this as a way to kind of advance their needs, but also the industry as a whole. So super excited to have all of the contributions. So we started in April of this year. In June, we had our FinOps X conference, which is the annual conference for FinOps, and we announced the 0.5. It was mostly to drive kind of awareness of the Focus specification and get people excited, get it on the cloud providers, radars and things like that. So since June, we've started working on the 1.0 spec. We are hoping to release that here in the next 2 weeks or so. In addition to that, we've also started working on these data converters. So every cloud provider has their way of presenting the data today. They are working on natively supporting Focus in the coming months. But we believe that in the meantime, these converters will be helpful to get this into organizations so that they can get value out of the focus specification right after the 1.0 release. But definitely, the future goal here is that all providers are providing their data sets in a focus compatible manner. So quick note on what all is in the 1.0. Really, we're focusing a lot on discounts. So in 0.5, we essentially created all the basics, the billing periods and charge periods and things like build cost and service names and those kinds of things. Then with the 1.0 specification, we're really focused on deeper cloud and SaaS concepts. So the concepts like discounts, obviously, every provider has them. They all call it different things. They all have slightly different semantics, but here's a consistent way to provide the cost data for it. Similarly, for usage data, unit prices, and other things. So here's a quick example of what one of the most important, kind of the top of the food chain kind of items looks like. This is hopefully looks very simple in terms of billing account ID is billing accounts are a resource grouping construct in the cloud world. And this essentially says, this must be there in the billing data and the requirements we have on it. And you might think, that seems like a pretty simple thing. What's the big value add there? Until you look at what the cloud providers today present as the equivalent of a billing account, right? And you can see here, just within Microsoft, even it is not consistent because they have different types of cost data outputs. And so also one of the things that I hope if you ever look at the specification, you'll notice is that we're using like easy to understand terms. I'm sure some of you that have looked at the cost data have seen net unblended, this and that, and like who can understand that if you were to give that to your engineering team and say, okay, figure out how to be efficient, like you're not going to understand that. So we've really spent days, if not sometimes weeks, arguing over terminology and trying to figure out a provider agnostic way to present this data. Another important thing is that focus, really a primary design principle for focus is that we're working backwards from the FinOps practitioners' use cases. So we have a library that practitioners themselves, like Anne over here, that team has built that describes, here's what I do as one of the FinOps activities in my company. And really the nice thing about focus is, like I said earlier, you get to have a standard way of now solving that use case because we've standardized the data and the schema and the terminology. So I already covered this. I'm going to fly through this because, I'm between you all and lunch, I think. So quickly about what's beyond 1.0. So you saw we have a bunch of stuff that we're planning to release in 1.0. We're already working with the cloud providers themselves for adding that native support. Many of them have publicly, mentioned support for this, written blogs about this, et cetera. So it's coming, but we're making sure that that happens in a timely manner. Working with the tooling vendors. Obviously, from the ingestion side, they would like to ingest focus data. That's everybody's dream. But then also supporting the reporting capabilities, export capabilities, so that when you take that data into your organization, it is still in focus compliant. It's still a focus compliant data set. And then working with large enterprises as well to ensure that they understand how to get this into their company and get value out of it. Obviously, with a 1.0, it doesn't mean we've solved all problems in the cost data. There's many others that we'll be looking at. And then there's some interesting expansion possibilities. People really bought into the kind of the focus umbrella of like, building specification and we've had asks for sustainability, for example, like before the providers really start providing this data, can we build a specification so that there's a standard way to provide sustainability data? So, trying to get ahead of the game there before providers come and present it in their own way. And then, lots of conversations about utilization and kind of that intersection as well. So I think this might be the last slide. Really important for us to kind of drive involvement and contributions to this, because at the end of the day, we don't want to build this based off of just our own kind of knowledge of the space. We want everybody to bring in the challenges that they face, the types of insights that they want to gain out of the data, so that we can really address this in a very holistic way. So please get involved. It does require a CLA contributor license agreement, meaning your company will have to approve that you can contribute to it. But we do that so that we can continue to ensure that this will remain free and open for as long as people want to use the focus specification. And then obviously FinOps Foundation itself, we have lots of events, a lot of community-driven events. There's roadshows, all kinds of stuff. Please, if you look at our website, you'll be able to find regional events. Obviously, we have our large conferences as well for kind of bringing the FinOps community together. So that's all I had in terms of slides. Happy to answer any questions folks have about Focus or FinOps or the foundation. Hey.
I just thought, is there any involvement from non-CSPs but SaaS vendors that, for example, Snowflake or OpenAI, where it's very consumption or execution-based building, but still very de-standardized today?
Yeah, I mean, we hear that as like one of the biggest problems that people have. And a lot of people say like, okay, there's tooling out there for cloud, maybe we could get by, we did at City too, right? But when it comes to SaaS, it's literally the Wild West. And so to answer your question, we have Datadog that's involved, Twilio's involved, and I'm trying to remember, I think Tailfin and some couple of smaller other vendors in the space are involved. But we haven't really gone after snowflakes and Mongos. We did a few months ago, but things kind of just blew up, and the CSP thing became the priority to go solve right away. But we are building the specification with SaaS in mind. There's actually a squad dedicated to ensuring that what we build in terms of specification content is compatible with the large SaaS vendors. This is actually where I'm going to need a lot of your help is the SaaS, in my view, the SaaS vendors are in the same state cloud was back in 2012-ish, 11. I used to work in AWS. There was a time when tag-based billing, this is probably 2011, tag-based billing was the #1 request from enterprises, because at that time we were just giving one big bill to few lines, and that's your cloud bill, and enterprises said, no, you can't do that. Like, we need to be able to do cost allocation and budgeting and forecasting. So SaaS is really still in that stage, in my opinion, and what's going to drive them to prioritize this type of stuff, not just focus, just better enterprise kind of capabilities, is the customers going to them and saying, no, sorry, you can't just willy-nilly change the numbers or say, yeah, this numbers may not add up to what I charge you, and that kind of stuff. Like that, that will only happen when they hear from the organizations that that's not an acceptable thing. So But we will definitely, after the 1.0, prioritize getting some of those folks on board on this. It is definitely a necessary thing. I can't tell you the number of large organizations that have come up to us and said, you got to get SaaS vendors on board on this. And I'm usually like, you need to help me get SaaS on board on this. But it is definitely a priority.
So when you say cloud providers are involved in this, are they going to provide their bills in the focus format, or they are?
They are, yeah. So they're not going to obviously commit to timelines, but at FinOps X in June, we had the 3 VPs from Azure, Google Cloud, and Oracle Cloud. And at the time, AWS hadn't signed onto this. And they all essentially talked about the need for focus because their customers are essentially asking for it. Google and Microsoft were the founding steering committee members of this, along with the FinOps Foundation. And recently, AWS has joined as well. And they are literally bringing in their cost management engineering folks and product management folks, all 3 providers, and OCI as well. So yeah, the goal is that there will be focus compliant billing data sets being natively produced by the providers. But we're kind of hedging our bets with the open source converters because one of them might take 6 months, another one might take 12 months, and then, what are our community going to get? They can just use the open source converter for the time being.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so the 0.5 is not is because we pretty much said we're announcing a 0.5 in order to gain some momentum. To give you an example, we had probably 30 people involved from August to June, and then or end of June, and then now July through now, AWS has signed, and all these other high-profile companies have signed on. So it was to use our conference at that time to drive the awareness of this effort. It was not necessarily because a lot of key things like the discounts and other things weren't in the specification. We just had 10 weeks to get something out. So we were pretty open about it, that it was really to drive the awareness at the time. But many of the vendors in the space are, I won't mention names, but are building support for focus in their tooling already. And we've had many organizations that have, nationwide, and like a bunch of different organizations that have said, like, as soon as 1.0 is released, that they're adopting it in their organizations. So it was one of those things where given the short time, we had to kind of get something out there, but it wasn't really ready for real use at the time.
This may sound counterintuitive, but have you ever got pushback from companies that are in the cost management space, given that using Focus, I can get my data myself instead of going to another third party who's taking 1.5% for every million spent? I can get my own data and do my own analysis going forward now.
I would say most of the cost management vendors have leaned in and are heavily involved in the building of the specification. I used to work for one of them, and I would say the reason the vast majority of them just support 2 or 3 vendors or cloud providers is because it is really hard to normalize data and provide a uniform view across these. So even tools like the one I used to work on, Cloudability, 10-year old product, till recently only supported 3 cloud vendors. Now recently they've added maybe a couple more. But this kind of specification is going to allow them to bring in all different types of data and be able to provide many of them are really focused on that value-added kind of portion and not this busy work of normalizing cost data and trying to provide the unified.
Speak really quickly from the vendor perspective. We embrace it because focus is sort of sharing the collective wisdom that our platforms do already do, but at the same time, like there's much more to our solutions than just the the data format. Right? We are also we also would be remiss to not follow it, even if we thought that was a risk, because people would be interested in seeing their charges in the groupings and specifications that focus the most over time. So if we don't incorporate the focus taxonomy into our presentation of the billing data, then we would fall behind that.
Yeah. Josh is definitely one of our contributors to the spec, so.
Didn't think the chance for a free ad.
Bagging into our head of the foundation meeting.
Any other questions or?
Does focus as well involve services cost apart from the platform cost?
Services as in like the labor costs and other things. Definitely on our roadmap is that like ultimately, I think the session before talked about it. We also kind of referenced it in the keynote is people need to get to total cost of ownership because that's what drives your operational margins and unit costs and other kind of advanced things you want to do. You can't do that if you're just doing cost management on an individual provider or just your cloud costs or something like that. You have to incorporate cloud costs and SaaS costs and labor costs and software licensing costs and internal cloud costs. Like those things matter to those advanced metrics you're trying to get to, like unit costs. So the idea is that, yeah, this will extend. We had to get the kind of the low-hanging fruit first, which is cloud and SaaS. And then beyond 1.0 is
Including the cybersecurity.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, it's a specification that tells you what your data needs to look like. So if you can take your labor costs and convert it to be in the specification, you can then easily ingest it with the rest of your costs and do allocations of those costs and
Apart from the data set as well, the prediction kind of.
not from a specification perspective, but obviously, there's lots of tooling out there that would do some of that value-added stuff. This is really focused on what does the data need to look like? What is the terminology and the semantics that's in the data?
How close it is to the real-time data? I know most of the tools collecting the data at the end of the month, how this is different or it's the same, but you're collecting the data in the end of the month.
Sorry, I didn't catch the last.
How the data is collected, is it close to the real-time data or it's kind of period at the end of the month, beginning of the month? I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think it'll depend on the source of the data, right? So like your classic cloud provider bills are generated like every 12 hours or, it depends on, the specification is just saying, here's how you present that data in a very consistent manner so that it can service the FinOps use cases. Yeah.
About the billing, right? Do you take into account the geographies and currencies?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are some of the more heavily argued about. So yeah, we've already introduced the concept of the billing currency so that you know what your essentially data is denominated in. But there's also another concept like for pricing. Many of the providers differentiate between pricing currency and what you're actually given an invoice in at the end of the day. So that's going to be introduced in the future as well. We've had lots of debates about currency conversions and do we normalize to a single currency or provide the data the way that the consumer is, essentially receiving their invoice in and things like that. And geography, same thing, starting off just with the regions and availability zones concepts, but ultimately US 1, US East 1A or whatever it may be is not the same as GCP's regions. So we will introduce deeper location-based normalized columns as well. All right. Thanks, everyone.